In this final NetVibes training video in the series, I'll be covering alerts and reporting. I'll be covering the purpose and potential of the Potions app specifically, how alerts and reports are configured, what else can be automated on the dashboard, including between both external services as well as with other parts of the 3DEXPERIENCE platform. And I will cover an overview of how Potions are configured generally, some of the key input and output ingredients, and some of the more common Potion configurations, as well as how you can automate sharing to 3D Swim. So in this session, we'll be using the Potions app, which is available again in the Eastern Quadrant. So I'll add that to my dashboard, and actually to explain how the Potion works, the easiest way to do this is to actually configure it and show you on the configuration screen. So each Potion takes a trigger or input ingredient on the left-hand side. We'll then set a set of criteria that are to be met. And when those criteria are met, then the action or output ingredient will be executed. So we basically have this input ingredient, a set of criteria, and then an output action. And each of these, the input and the output, there are a number of what we call ingredients that the Potion can be configured with. So for example, for the inputs, we have a number of inputs that are based on data coming from the NetVibes apps, such as the analytics ingredient, the compare ingredient, the track topic ingredient. But then we have other ingredients that are coming perhaps from outside, from third-party sources, such as from Twitter, stock charts, and so on. And then it's similar for the actions or output ingredients. Some of those are internal, so things like 3D Drive, 3D Swim, the NetVibes Pushmail, but we can also integrate with third-party services such as Twitter, and the ability to send SMS to your phone. So what I'll do is go through some of the most commonly used ingredients and just talk a bit about how those work, how they're configured. So in terms of the trigger or input ingredients, first of all, we have the analytics ingredient, which is definitely really useful. The analytic ingredient can be configured in a few ways, and it depends actually on which analytics app you're going to use. That will determine how this will be configured. So my chart is updated is used for the apps that are basically tracking data over time. So for example, the What Is Said app would be appropriate for that configuration. So if you wanted to know when the number of mentions or number of articles increased above a certain threshold, you would want to use that My Chart is Updated. The second and third options, when an entry enters the top or exits the top, that is used when we have an analytic app such as the What app set to keywords, so when a new entry maybe enters the top 10 keywords, or perhaps the Where Is It Happening app, when a new domain enters the top 5, we could have the Potion be triggered based on that change. So then, having chosen the appropriate option and the relevant analytics app, in this case, What Is Said About Smart Speakers, you will get configuration options specific to those choices that you've made. And I'll talk about those a little bit more when we go through the examples. So that's the analytics ingredient. Next we have date and time, which allow you to set a Potion to be triggered on a recurring basis. So the second one is the one that you'd probably choose if you were just using date and time. So this would trigger the potion at a particular point in time, such as every Wednesday at noon. During a defined period of time is useful when you combine the date and time with another ingredient. So you could say, let's have this potion only be active during business hours. And then when the other ingredient is triggered during business hours, then the potion will be triggered. Potion ingredient can be quite useful because this allows you to send an email to your potion to trigger it, or to just request your potion URL. This is particularly useful for testing a potion. So if you're not sure why a potion isn't triggering, then you could use this potion just to make sure that the output is as you're expecting. And you would basically just visit this URL in your web browser. It's a URL dedicated to this particular potion. So that's useful for basically testing. Then the final trigger ingredient is the track topic. So this allows you to take any track topic on your dashboard. When there's a new article published in the track topic that you choose, we'll take either that new article or the articles over a particular time period and either put all of those into the output ingredient or just those that match additional conditions. The track topic is already filtered, so you've probably already set the title criteria or the content criteria that you want, but you could potentially add additional criteria here in terms of the title, the content, whether it includes images, and whether it was published by a particular author. And then in terms of the output ingredients, the first one I'll talk about is 3D Swim. This is useful when combined with the track topic ingredient, and it allows you to take that input data. So for example, if your track topic is press releases by a competitor, if you think every time a competitor publishes a new press release that warrants some kind of discussion, you could maybe create a post or a question in a particular swim community so you can determine whether any action maybe needs to be taken because of that competitive press release. The other scenario that this can be useful for is if you combine it with opinions. So whenever you add a certain opinion to an article, that could potentially not just allow you to analyze the article in NETVIBES, but also trigger that article being published to a swim community. Next we have email. So email and actually phone or SMS are both the kind of standard output options for an alert. So if you just want to be alerted that a change has happened, that a chart has increased in value, you can have an email sent to yourself, to your colleagues, and you can choose whether that subject and message body are automatically populated. And typically, I recommend actually just leaving these alone because by default, the subject and message body will be populated with relevant information from that input. Or you can choose a custom one if you wish. And that's configured in a very similar way to the phone. One thing to note on the phone ingredient, we can send SMS messages to numbers that are in either the US, France, UK, and Germany currently. And then the final output ingredient I'd like to highlight is the Pushmail. So the Pushmail is our main way of reporting on data that's in NETVIBES externally. And it's essentially an email-based report. So the configuration allows you to send this report to multiple recipients, but it allows you to basically take apps from the dashboard, And whenever this potion is triggered, you'll get a snapshot of that specific subset of apps, whether those are analytics apps or track topics. Any NetVibes app can go in the Pushmail. So I'd like to configure 2 of these for you, just from start to finish. It's a pretty quick process. So 2 example configurations that are quite common. So the first one actually is the Pushmail. So typically with the Pushmail, that would be a recurring report. Perhaps every Monday morning you want to see what's been going on in the past week. So I would take the date and time input ingredient. And because we want this to be triggered purely from the date and time ingredient, we'll do on a specific date or time. And then we'll say at a certain time. So we'll say at 9 a.m. on Mondays. But as you can see, there's a number of different options if you want to just do the first of the month on a specific date. Once per year, you have a number of different options, but we'll do Monday at 9, and this is in the time zone of the individual configuring the potion, so it'll be 9 a.m. for me. So at 9 a.m. our potion will be triggered. And because we want to send a Pushmail, our output ingredient will be the Pushmail. So I'll select the Pushmail, and then most of the input fields are fairly self-explanatory. So the email list are the recipients. And of course, you can add as many as you want. The subject is the subject of the email, so we'll call it weekly report. Sender name is the name that will appear as in the send field in the user's email client, and likewise the email address would be the reply to address. You can choose to add a banner image to the top of the Pushmail if you like, and also add a link to that image, which can be a nice way to link to the dashboard itself if the recipients have access to it. And you can also choose to add some text to the top of the email and to the end of the email, just to potentially introduce people to the email so they know what it's about. And then we can choose to add any of the NetVibes apps to the Pushmail. So this is really where we're defining the content of the Pushmail. So in this case, I could choose a few of the analytics apps maybe. We'll choose what is said about smart speakers. We'll choose how a smart speaker is perceived. Let's maybe add the comparison app so we can see that comparison. And then maybe we also want to see the actual articles. So we'll add the smart speaker articles track topic. So there's no extra configuration for the analytics apps, but there is for the tracked topics. So first of all, we can choose how much of the article should be included. So by default, we get a short snippet of the article text, but we can choose to make that longer if we wish. And then we can also determine what we want to happen if there are articles that were published before the previous Pushmail was sent. So do we want those articles to be included even though they were in the last Pushmail? Do we want them to be included in this one as well? Or do we only want new articles to be included? And there are a few options, so there's quite a lot of flexibility there with how you want this to be handled. So the first option is, and the default is, only send articles that were published since the last Pushmail was sent. So if we have a weekly Pushmail and we have our limit in terms of the number of articles set to 5, but maybe there were only 3 articles published since the last Pushmail, this will mean we actually won't go up to that limit. We'll just include the 3 articles that were published after the last Pushmail was sent. So we won't have any duplicates. The next option is just to send 5 articles, whatever you have set here, regardless of the publication date. So we'll always send 5, and if those 5 articles were published over the past 2 weeks and 3 of them were included in the last Pushmail, then that's fine. We'll include them. The final option is to include only those articles published after a specific date. So in our previous option, if we include articles regardless of their publication date, if these 5 articles were published over a period of 6 months and we have a really slow track topic, then you're going to be getting the same articles over and over again. Versus if we choose after a specific date and then maybe say just include those articles that were published over the last month, or maybe even over the past 3 weeks, it means we're only going to get those articles a handful of times. They're not going to start to annoy the recipients, but it will mean that they'll have a couple of opportunities to see them and make sure they didn't miss them. So that is also an option. Personally, I tend to just go with the after the last Pushmail was sent, but you do have some flexibility. We can then send a test. So I'll send a test to myself just to see, get a preview of what that Pushmail looks like. And here is an example of that Pushmail. So we have a banner image that I didn't customize, a what is said app showing us the trend over time. We have the how is it perceived app. We have that comparison app. And then we also have the articles as well. And we can click through to the article if we want to read any of those. So that is the Pushmail. I'll just save that. Click on next, give it a name, call it weekly report, and we have our Pushmail. So the second one I'd like to show is an alert based on change in the analytics. So we'll configure our potion, and this time we'll choose the analytic app as an input. And what I want to be alerted to is when there is an increase in mentions. So I will select when my chart is updated, because I'm basically looking at this app and I want to know when there's an increase over time. So I'm going to choose my what is said about smart speakers app. I only have one series, so I don't need to change that. And I will look at chart values from the past 2 days. One thing I could do is I could just choose only the new chart value, and I could say, okay, typically I don't get more than 15 mentions. You know, over this 3-month period, there are 2 times I've had more than 15, so that seems like a reasonable frequency. It is good to look at those values just to see in the prior period how often you'd be getting those alerts. And maybe you want a weekly alert, but this is going to alert us, or this would alert us to the bigger spikes. So we could say, okay, just use the new chart value, and when there's greater than 15 results, then trigger the potion. That's one option, and that can work well. Another option, we'll get rid of that one, is to look at the chart values from the past 2 days and then actually say, okay, when there's a variation, and that variation is greater than a, let's say 50% increase, then send that alert. And depending on your data set, one or the other may be better. So if we have it set at an absolute threshold, we would get those 2 alerts in these 2 cases. But perhaps we actually want to know when we're getting this kind of increase we've got a 50% increase from one day to the next, and the threshold criteria wouldn't have alerted us to this kind of a change, but that 50% change day over day would. So you do have some options there too, and you could even set up both if you'd rather have a potion that alerts for every possibility. So that is our input. So we can actually have multiple inputs. So I will highlight how we can use those. So in this case, I'll add a date and time input so that I can make this potion only active during work hours. So in this case, I don't want to be notified outside of a particular time period, so I'll choose this, the during a defined period of time trigger. And I will say that I only want this potion to be active from 8 AM to 6 PM. And I only want it to be active Monday through Friday. So I'll save that. And now, because I have when all happen, it means that both of these two inputs need to be triggered for my output to actually be executed. If I chose any, then I could add multiple different options, and when each one was triggered individually, then I get my outputs. But in this case, I want both of those to happen. And then in this case, I just want to receive an email. So nice simple configuration. I'll send it to myself. Now that we have an input ingredient, it is basically picking up the fact that we have this chart as our input. So the subject will be that the chart is updated, and then the title of the chart, and then we'll get the value, the new value in the body of the message. So we'll click on save, click on next, and then we can call this 50% increase in mentions. And we have a potion that will send us an email whenever we have an increase in mentions of 50% day over day, and it's during business hours. So first, a best practice. So some email systems will block delivery of emails that are sent by outside servers that have a from address of that company's domain name. So what I recommend in this instance is, so for example, in the Pushmail, in that reply to email address, rather than using your company's email address, you can just use no reply at 3ds.com. In that case, it will just be treated as an external email address. And then finally, you will occasionally notice that these potions will become unconfigured. You'll get an email saying that the potion's no longer configured. Usually this is because of an issue with an ingredient, and typically it tends to be a third-party ingredient. Some of these ingredients, like Twitter, you need to be authenticated, and there are a few more variables. If you lose your session with Twitter, your potion would become unconfigured, and you need to just go in and reconfigure it. You do get an email when that happens, but that's just something else to look out for. So this concludes the training on alerts and reporting, and it actually concludes the whole NetVibes training. So I hope you've enjoyed it.